It is, isn't it? All right, let me alert everybody that we're streaming now. Okay. All right, tonight we're going to be in the book of Matthew chapter 10. We're going to look at the idea of wolves dressed up like sheep. And if you've ever been in a play and ever had to dress up as another character, this could be a little bit of fun. All right, have anybody ever done any acting at all? Been in a play at all? Yeah, a couple of you? Okay. In high school and in 12th grade, our senior play was Arsenic and Old Lace was the name of it. And I was the police officer, of course. And it was a fun play. I'm not going to tell you anymore because that has nothing to do with tonight. But the idea of being dressed up as something else or someone else is fun for some people. Not so much for others, but for many it is. And when we come to the Matthew chapter 10, starting with verse 16, and Jesus is getting ready to send out his 12 disciples. I think it's like a test ministry here. Go on out, we're going to do this, and you're going to come back and report. But he's very explicit where he says, I send you out as sheep in the middle of wolves. I mean, that's kind of hard to think about, isn't it? To go out knowing that you're going to be torn to pieces. What really this tells me that people involved in ministry will face people and obstacles from time to time. They're going to challenge them to the point of breaking with the desire to break them. I mean, that's the idea of wolves, is to destroy. In verse 17 and 18, he mentions two primary areas from which direct attack from persecutors will come. In verses 19 and 20, we will see the promises of God and his provisions for the persecution. In 21 through 22, he mentions another two areas of indirect attack. And in verse 23, he tells his followers how to respond when persecution comes. I look at this text as a life lesson for the disciples. This is what you're going to experience. And to their credit, 11 of them stay, don't they? They stay in it. So verse 16, we're going to look at Roman numeral 1. There is an analogy. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. And that's the analogy. And what he is doing, Jesus begins with a word that signifies his desire for the 12 to pay special attention. Behold. Any of your other Bibles have a different word there? Look. Yeah, look. Look. If you're been talking with somebody, say, look, I want to tell you something. It's kind of the same thing. Behold, I'm going to send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. You're going to be defenseless. But at the end, there will be some things we're going to talk about, okay? That's kind of what he's getting at here. And Jesus had spoken of the unbelieving masses when he spoke of unbelieving masses, like in Matthew 9:36 and in Matthew 10, verse 8, where sheep were without a shepherd. And that's kind of a thing to think through when you have a bunch of sheep and there's no shepherd around to protect them. I mean, what do? They wander, they get lost, they get into trouble. Sounds like us, doesn't it? We need our great shepherd. Now, we do understand that he will give the 12 special powers to be used as they ministered as their credentials. This is their resume. I am commissioned by Jesus. Here is my resume. This is what he has enabled me to do. And they do all of these wonderful things before the others. But Jesus wanted the 12 to know that the world's sheep could and would cause them to suffer. Because, yes, they are like sheep without a shepherd, but they are sheep, really, that are dressed, their costumes hide the wolves underneath. The world is a vicious place, folks. The world is a place where it seeks your destruction as a believer. Okay? It is a world that would rather be in existence without God. It's a world that would rather control their own destiny, control their own futures, define what is right and wrong, and they would have nothing to do with the light. Even though they had the credentials from God, they would suffer for the cause of Christ. In that paradoxical truth, Jesus graphically pointed out the tensions between our vulnerability and our invincibility. We are vulnerable as people, but with God, the invincibility is there. Between our weakness in ourselves and our strength in him. Between the power of hateful persecution and the power of loving submission. Between the worldly power of the flesh and the supernatural power of the Spirit. Quite the contrast, isn't it? Sheep are one of the most dependent and helpless animals of all domesticated animals. Now, may I suggest even the human baby is even more so. Children growing up within the home have to be nurtured and protected and guided for nearly 18 to 20 years. When we talk about domesticated animals, the sheep are right in line. They are the most dependent and helpless animals. Almost everything sends them into a panic. Our new pet at our house, our cat, she's just at a year old right now. We've named her Shadow. The animal shelter called her Speedy for various reasons. She's very fast and very inquisitive and very mean with love. I'm probably one of the only that she still hunts to try to eat. True story. She hunts me like she's going to eat me. But she's very skittish. I can just tap my foot once, and she jumps and off into the corner she runs, and she looks around like, what was that? And she stops, and I'm laughing, and she's like, it was you again. But that is what sheep are like. Anything sets them off in a pack. They have no defense except to run. They run. And in the Palestinian region, their biggest predators would have been wolves. So this analogy that Jesus uses, people would have understood this. The shepherd had his work cut out for him in this part of the world. Who was it in Scripture that was known as a shepherd that defeated a lion and a bear? David. And he did it with his bare hands. He didn't have a gun or a rifle at his side. He did it with his bare hands. May I suggest he did it within the power of God. God gave him that ability. You see, the 12 were called to go out as sheep into the realm of the wolves, proclaiming a message that God gave them. This graphic illustration of their rejection and persecution by a God-hating world that they would face was because of him. So before they were sent out, Jesus told them the cost of discipleship. Look at Acts chapter 20, verse 29. Wolves have always and continue to ravage and make raids on the church, just as they have done since its inception. Acts chapter 20, verse 29 says this, I know that after my departure, wonderful wolves will enter, right? Is that what it says there? Savage wolves will come among you, not sparing the flock. We are the vulnerable. They are the people with teeth, and they're not going to hold back. They're not going to pass up one to get to another. They're going to take everybody out that calls themselves a Christian, that calls themselves a follower of Christ or a child of God. I know after my departure, and you see Paul here, when he's writing here, I know that after my departure, savage wolves are going to come among you. Make sure I've got the author right there, okay? Or the person in question. No, wait. Oh, for crying out loud. The leader as he leaves. Let's put it that way, okay? I'm drawing a brain frog here. The leader, after he would leave, said, they're coming after you, okay? Shepherds are important, aren't they? They are. Spiritual leaders are important, aren't they? For they guard the flock of God.
Many a church has been neutralized by wolves.
They have. Many churches have been neutralized. I like the word you use there, neutralized. They still exist. They still call themselves churches, but they are no longer effective. And it can happen really fast. It won't take years. It will just happen rather quickly. There is a cost of following Christ. We are never promised the riches of this world for following him. We are promised by Jesus hardship, suffering, and in some cases, death. Here are the benefits of working for me: hardship, suffering, and death. Anybody want to sign up? For eternal life, I will. How's that? Okay? If we are to serve Christ, we must count the cost. never becoming mediocre or unfruitful or unfaithful, and begin to think that our wealth, our health, and material success is a mark of divine approval. The things of this world mean nothing for eternity, but only what is done for him will last. After the siege of Rome in 1849, it was Garibaldi that said to his soldiers, "Men, all our efforts against superior forces have been unavailing. I have nothing to offer you but hunger and thirst, hardship and death, but I call on all who love their country to join with me." And many did, to their own demise. We have to understand that the Christian life is not marked by continual persecution. There are times where that'll be good. That'll be calm and peaceful, for we are to seek out a peaceful existence, if you will. We don't go out looking for persecution. We don't go out looking for a fight. Believe me, they're going to find you amongst themselves. Matter of fact, we are called, as much as lies within you, live peaceably with all men. That verse implies there are going to be times where it won't. And there will be times that you have to take action to put the balance back in things. But when those difficult times come, we must be aware when it does come and from where it comes from. All right? So this is the Roman numeral 1 there is the point of the setting upon which we are going to in chapter 10. For I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So we go down to Roman numeral 2. There's an attitude in verse 16. So be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. That seems kind of a little strange, doesn't it? Often when we start talking about serpents, we take a step back and say we don't have nothing to do with that. And here Jesus says being shrewd as a serpent. The illustration that Jesus uses is right on the mark. For in Egyptian hieroglyphics, serpents symbolize wisdom. Okay? They were considered to be shrewd, smart, cunning, cautious. Think back to the Garden of Eden, the serpent that spoke with Eve. He was shrewd, wasn't he? Got right to the point. He was smart. He was cunning. He was smart and waited for the appropriate time. He was cunning. He was cautious. Just playing it a little bit further, taking it back, getting her to think in her mind where he wanted her to think about God and what he actually said. And in this last characteristic, Christians are to emulate the serpent. In Colossians 4, verse 5, Paul advises believers to conduct themselves with wisdom toward outsiders. When you come to an unsaved person, we have to be wise in dealing with them. We have to be able to gauge when the opportune time to share the gospel with them would be. For to be too early may push them away, but to wait too long, too late. We must make the most of the opportunity. As believers, we must be shrewd and cunning in dealing with the unbelieving world around us, to not become unequally yoked in many various terms of relationships as we are commanded. And the idea behind this is saying the right things at the right time, being sensitive to the needs of other people that still do not know Jesus as their Savior. To be wise with words. Where is it in the book of James where we're, consider the tongue little member, but boy, it can certainly catch a house on fire, can it? Saying the wrong things at the wrong time, the wrong spirit, causes all sorts of problems. There also, so beyond the serpent, we see this idea of innocent as doves. A dove represents being pure or innocent. As we proclaim the gospel, we should never be abrasive, coarse, inconsiderate, belligerent, blatant, or blunt. And I use the word blunt very cautiously there, because sometimes, very few, you kind of have to be a little blunt with bluntful people to tell them like it is. But that is the wisdom of knowing when to be that way, not to be malicious with them. If we go to 1 Corinthians chapter 9 with me, please turn there. 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 19 through 22. Paul wrote this, "For I have made," let me read it right out of my notes here. Actually, let me change the versions. I want this to be a little more pointed here. Not blunt, not blatant, but just a little bit more in our understanding. Verse 19, For though I be free from all men, yet have I made myself servant unto all, that I might gain the more. And unto the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. To them that are without the law as without law, being not without law to God, but under the law of Christ, that I might gain them that are without law. In verse 22, to the weak I became as weak, that I might gain the weak. I am made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. You know, Paul was very wise in his dealing with people. Now what he's getting at, he didn't participate in the debauchery of the unsaved lifestyle, but he understood his audiences. He understood people from where they were coming from. He understood the weak. He understood the Jews. He understood the Gentiles. He understood them, and he knew them, and he could relate to them. In Hebrews chapter 7:26, turn there with me, please. Hebrews chapter 7:26. The idea of being like Christ himself. For such an high priest became us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and may higher than the heavens. It's a life that is different than that of the life of the world. In Luke 6:27, we are to love our enemies, whereas Jesus is our model of such action. The attitude. Back to Matthew chapter 10. Roman numeral 3, the persecution. 7:26. So Matthew chapter 10, verse 17. Again, don't go looking for persecution. Don't go looking for a fight. Don't go out these doors looking to tick someone off just so you can just rattle the Bible over. That's not what we do. All right? We don't go looking for a fight. We go looking where God directs. In verse 17 and 18, Jesus identifies and warns, or he begins to warn in these two verses about 4 areas in which wolves persecute believers. And these are the direct ones. Later on down in the verses we'll find indirect. But verse 17, we find persecution by religion. Beware of men, for they will deliver you up to the councils, and they will scourge you in their synagogues. A little side note here. It's not the councils we know in our church. All right? Some of you got that, all right? You don't have any synagogues, do you? No? Okay. Whew. All right. But the first source of persecution is religion. The words courts and synagogues refer to this persecution. The Jews had their own system of courts and that they tried their people in. A Jew accused of breaking the Mosaic law or even rabbinic tradition would be brought to these courts. And that court, that ruling religious body, would be the ones to decide their fate. And you're like, no, wait a minute. Where do we see that demonstrated out? How about with Jesus? And they maliciously went after him with a vengeance. Over and over and over again, they sought his death. As the 12 disciples preached and taught and ministered in Christ's name, they would be sure to be brought before these courts, and many of them would. Paul was brought up again and again and again and again and again, questioned by leaders of both Jewish and Gentile sources. By the time Paul had written 2 Corinthians, he had been scourged 5 times. You know what scourging is? It's not like a little slap on the hand. It's flat out beaten to where the flesh is ripped off your body. 5 different times and left for dead. William Barclay said this, that the man with a message from God has to undergo the hatred and enmity of a fossilized orthodoxy. That's pretty sad, isn't it? When we start talking with people about Christ, we must be careful, dare I say, not to include religion. It's not religion that saves. It's Christ. That's why we use the Scriptures, according to the Scriptures, according to the Scriptures, over and over again. According to the Scriptures, Christ died for us.
But the unsaved mistake the scriptures for religion.
They do, and they must be taught. There's a difference. It is about a relationship, isn't it? The unsaved sees the Bible as a religion. It does define Christianity at large. But be careful not to use religion when talking about salvation. Use the Scriptures. Okay? Because many people begin to think that it's religion that saves you. So it should not surprise us that persecutions will come, and they will come to increase it as the end times approach. Letter B, persecution by government. Now, there's not a government in the world that persecutes Christians, is there? Or followers of Christ? Many do. The majority do. Verse 18, and you shall be brought before governors and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them and the Gentiles. The reason why wolves are so vicious towards the sheep is because of Christ. The world hates Christians because it hates Jesus. This means that any person that has Christ is a potential target of Satan. Congratulations, you have targets on your back. Isn't that wonderful? I'd rather march around with a target on my back than not with one. Because if I don't have one, I'm either carnal or I'm unsaved. I'd rather be living for Christ. Think of it like this. A person that hides Christ will be in little danger of attack by the evil one, but a person that lives Christ stands open to attack. Look at John chapter 15, 18 through 21. If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love his own. But because you are not of this world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. Remember the word that I said unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord. If they have persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they have kept my saying, they will keep yours also. But all these things will they do unto you for my name's sake, because they know not him that sent me. They are without God. They don't know who he is. They have a warped concept of who he is, but they don't know the living God. Don't come to the conclusion that all government is evil, okay? There are some that protect the right to worship as you see fit. They protect all religion at large. But many do. So, a function of government, among many for government, is to preserve social order. And in order to do that, there have to be certain rules in place, but unfortunately, some of those rules can be manipulated by Satan to actually extinguish any recognition of who God is. That'll be a part of it in the end, won't it? Back to Matthew chapter 10. We have a provision before we get down to Roman numeral 5. There's a provision in verse 19 and verse 20. To be persecuted or wrongly accused only makes people want to speak up and defend themselves. But when they, verse 19, deliver you up, take no thought how or what you shall speak, for it shall be given you in that same hour what you shall speak. For it is not ye that speak, but the Spirit of your Father which speaketh in you. Let that sink in a little bit. I mean, many of us, we want to defend ourselves right away, don't we? When you're accused or when you're attacked verbally. Don't do it. If the words come, God will give them to you at the appropriate time. Don't be anxious. Don't speak until ready. Paul reminds us in Philippians 4 verse 6 to let our requests be made known unto God. Pray before you open your mouth. Speak the wisdom words, if you will. We also notice in the text that when the time comes for us to speak, we will be given what we are to speak. Have you ever read stories of martyrs and some of the things that they spoke right at the very end? And those things that they speak are the most powerful and moving speeches ever spoken by them. Why is that? Because the Spirit speaks through them. Okay? Verse Roman numeral 5, the hatred. The hatred. Now, it's one thing for governments and other entities to be persecuting believers, but think about this. And the brother shall deliver up the brother to death, and the father the child, and the children shall rise up against their parents and cause them to be put to death. You know, when I read that verse, I got to think not just of today, but what it's going to be like in the tribulation. To be a believer in the tribulation, to actually have your own family members turn you over to be killed because of Christ. That even happens today. To be known as a Christian in certain lands is to be marked for death. I knew several in our last ministry who were persecuted by their own families. They would go home and their parents or siblings would make fun of them for going to church, for being a believer. But there they stood as a light in a darkened home. It wasn't easy for them, but they kept coming and they kept on living for Christ. Look at verse 22, letter B, by society. So if the family wasn't enough, an indirect attack in verse 22, and you shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that endureth to the end shall be saved. When society is faced with the truthfulness of the gospel, it is going to attack. We see this all the time on the news. When you have a protest by any group that God condemns their behaviors of, and the truth is brought before them, what does that group do? They attack. There's no debate. There's no discussion. It's immediate violence towards the truth. And those that are there with the truth are usually the ones that pay physically because of the truth. Yes? It's yeah. Paul warns us that it shouldn't surprise us as the world gets closer to the end that apostasy is great. And there's a walking away from the truth. And there's increased violence towards the truth. Okay, and that's what I'm getting at here. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I think that we are seeing, first of all, I don't think that we really know what persecution is as a free society like other countries do, where the religious freedom is really suppressed. But nonetheless, I see that we are rapidly approaching that state, so to speak, and we hear people talk about Christian nationalism and being the Christians who hate the homosexual and all these things, and they're painting pictures of us that are not true because of their hatred for us, and as a result, other people then get this image of us which is distorted.
And what you're going to see is the believers who compromise with the world are typically the ones that are not as attacked as violently of the ones that will not compromise what is right and wrong. Yes, it has. You will no longer just be called names. You will be destroyed in the public's eye. Yeah. And we,
It just isn't happening today. It
It's-
happened way back.
and it will continue. Sacrificing your children doesn't mean have to be taking their lives. You can sacrifice your children in another way, by leaving them to the world. Because the world is under the weight of the curse of sin.
We already see shootings in churches.
Yeah. Remember when you went to church 20, 30 years ago? You didn't have to have those up on the wall. See what that little black box is right there? You're being watched. Did you know that? You want to see it? This is kind of cool. Just a minute. We've still got 5 minutes. We're good. Come on. Wait for it. It's coming. Oh, come on. There it is. There you are. Everybody wave to yourselves. Hi, everybody. You know why you have these? For security. Now, this is not armed. It's not recording us. But when we wouldn't have. Not in this little church. But we put these in, and I got to tell you, they've come in handy already. Maybe when I'm here, I'll have them armed when I'm here by myself. I'll hear a door open, or it'll alert me, hey, someone's outside. And so I'll go, oh, okay, I know that person. Okay, we just don't know. We don't know what's going to happen anymore. So can we protect ourselves? Sure, we should. We should be wise stewards. Now, we don't use these for spying. If you're here, I'm not going to sit on my couch going, I can speak through those, and I'm not the only one who has access to these. Several others do. We do have a silent security team here, by the way. And some of you are on that. I know one of you who's here tonight. Okay? And you have access to this. At least you should. But look, you could, with all that set aside, the world that we live in is spiraling out of control. We understand that. All right? But the rest of our text goes on to say this idea of enduring to the end. The idea of enduring to the end does not procure salvation. It doesn't earn it, but rather it's an evidence of it. Enduring with Christ is an evidence of you being saved. Yeah, that's right. It's a proof that a person is truly redeemed and a child of God. So verse 23, there is a response. Now I got to go back all the way to find the verse here. Okay, there it is. But when they persecute you in this city, flee ye into another. For verily I say unto you, you shall not have gone over the cities of Israel till the Son of Man be come. You see what he's getting at here? We are told by Christ that whenever persecution comes, flee. In other words, you can get out of it if you can. If there's a way out, take it. Well, yeah, he does. And that's in the end times, and that's the extreme. But look, when somebody is calling you a name for sharing the gospel with them, you don't have to stand there and just take the abuse. You can say, okay, thank you for your time, and leave and go home. You can shake off the dust off your feet and move on. Okay? Don't go seeking out persecution. It's the third time I've said that, or bring it on yourself. Christ urges to escape persecution when doing so is possible. There will be times where you can't, but when the times they come, you can't. Go to Acts chapter 12. You know, those that he called to be martyrs couldn't escape. And they were martyred for Christ as a testimony of him. But not all of us are going to be called to be martyrs. Okay? Verse 14. Acts 12, verse 14, and then verse 17. Now this is the text where Peter's in prison. Peter gets out of prison, knocks on the door where the others have locked themselves in the room. And this little girl named Rhoda heard it, and when she knew Peter's voice, she opened not the gate for gladness, but ran in and told how Peter stood before the gate, or stood on the other side of the door. Okay, great. Now, verse 17. But he, beckoning unto them with the hand to hold their peace, declared unto them how the Lord had brought him out of prison. Peter was in prison. He was being persecuted. He was imprisoned for his faith. And God brought him out, didn't he? And he said, go show these things unto James and to the brethren. And he departed and went into another place. He didn't stick around to see what would happen. He left. God provided the way of escape, and that is the pattern of Paul, that Paul's getting at here. The pattern of Peter, in Acts 12, 14, and 17. You know, how many times was Jesus surrounded by his enemies and he went through them or left? Okay? There's a time and a place of persecution, but when God opens the door to leave, go. All right? Well, that's all I have for you tonight. Yes? Okay. Well, so they liked him and then they didn't like him?
Right.
Because he wasn't what they expected him to be. Yep. They wanted a savior of their own design instead of God's design. Okay? All right. Any others? Yes?
To Donna's point, often unbelievers love the way Christians live. They just don't want to hear what it takes to get there.
That's true. Yes. That's right. They want it. I like what you have, but don't push it on me mentality. All right? Yeah, it's okay for you, but not for me. Okay, fine. I'll take the message to somebody else who wants it then. And they are out there, folks. People are out there. They are looking and wanting to hear.
Well, in John 3, it mentions how people did not come to the light because their deeds were evil. And so when we are present with people and they know what our stand is, and we're not sitting in judgment of them, it's just our life, our testimony, all of that, it's like a light shining on them. And they don't like that because their deeds are evil. And they like being able to do that without conviction and feeling guilty or whatever else.
Crimes are never committed in the eye of people. They're always committed in secret. Okay? All right. Tom, would you close us in prayer, please? Thank you.